So I understand that the first EP was called Borrowed Guitars.
That's right.
But you want to pay cognizance to the fact that Nikhil D'Souza and Kenneth Basumatari were an important part of the beginning of Slight Diversion.
Essential, I'd say. Well, Nikhil used to bounce in and out of his many international tours and say, these are my songs, these are my songs, these are my songs. And I used to love his music. And he said, at one point he came up with something and I said, well, it's nice melodically, but it's not very good lyrically. And so he said, well, you bloody write it then. And then he slammed the door and left. So I took a day and I wrote a lyric and he says, well, that's not too bad. Do you have any? And he brought me into a studio to record that very thing when he was recording it and sending it off to Warner Brothers at the time. And after he'd finished his session in the studio, and he's a real pro, so he was done in about 15 minutes with this thing, including backing vocals. He said, do you have anything else? And I was like, well, no, not really. So Kenny and he put me in the studio and they started kind of directing me to do things. At the end of it, they said, you have 5 ideas, do you know this? And I said, I have no idea. So he said, you need to develop these 5 ideas. And these 5 ideas became the Borrowed Guitars EP. And we didn't even have a band name before that. They said, do you want to go under your own name? And I said, well, not really. And they said, well, what about, when we were stuck in a jam, and we said, well, why don't we just call it Slight Diversion, because we have day jobs. So that was one way to do it. And they said, well, what do you want to call the EP while we were going to record it? And I was like, well, I don't know. At the time, I didn't have an instrument that was in tune, that would stay in tune. And Nikhil said, don't worry, I'll lend you my guitar. So the entire first EP was recorded on one guitar and our 2 voices. And it was called Borrowed Guitars because of that. And essentially, now that I've privileged enough to own instruments, I look back on that time as being incredibly fertile and fun, because it really was a brotherhood of people who wanted to make interesting music independently. And now we come full circle to the situation where Ankur has amazingly kind of held us as we've gone through this process of trying to find that spirit once more.
94.3 Radio 1.